HalfStack. We did HalfStack in Fulham, outdoors. It was really cool. Mina did this live coding thing that you're going to see next, and they do an exceptional job with that. And then the day after the conference, I was invited to this thing, and I showed up at the end, and Joana had done this amazing performance that I missed, and we're not going to see that one today, but it was a really cool thing with browser dev tools and art and other cool stuff like that. Anyway, as long story short, a year later, we're finally getting Joana on the HalfStack stage, and we're going to have Welcome to Dancing Browsers, and I have no idea what it's about, but that's what makes it even more exciting. So let's give it up for Joana.
Thank you. Maybe we could have the lights go a bit dark again. Just to help readability. All right, I'll get started. Thank you for having me. Super nice to get to know this community. So I thought to present some of the, a little bit of the work, or let's say a little bit of the things that inspire my work, but also more in general my life, which is dance. As you can see, I decided to make advantage of JavaScript, maybe not the most conventional way, but I'm using this JS file for the presentation. But I know that a few people here were into ASCII, so we're not very far in terms of aesthetics. So my name is Joana Chicau. And actually, my background is in graphic design. And through that, I came into doing websites like most of us do. I'm quite inspired by net art and how you can sort of own those spaces, which is something that sort of stayed in the 90s, and now we have template culture and many other things that we sort of succumb to. But I think this presentation, quite unexpectedly for me, follows quite interesting ones that came before. I mean, all of them were interesting, but in particular the one about esoteric programming. I don't know if the person is still in the room, but we definitely share a lot of interest in that realm. And then also just the last one around the web console. That was actually, for me, it's my learning environment, really, inspecting other websites and understand how people do the web. So just quickly about myself. Background in graphic design, but also another background much earlier than graphic design. When I was around 4 years old, I started dancing, and I stick to it, and I'm still doing it now. I'm not doing ballet anymore. I'm very much into tango. I don't know if there's any tango dancers in the house, but I'm sure all of you at some point have encountered dance, or maybe you dance, and it doesn't matter if it's in the shower or in the club, or it's just dance seems to really be part of our lives in some way. In my case, I'm pretty obsessed with it, and so it's sort of in my mind a lot. So I started looking into how languages are used to describe dance and movement, and I think this is where esoteric programming sort of comes along. But it's not, if you think about dance composition, it is a language, or it's made of many languages, because the way you describe movement can be very diverse, just like the way you can write other codes. And I take a lot of inspiration by looking at scores from dance, and to try to understand the logic that comes behind and the way people define time and space. So this comes from a project that I'm involved with called Geometries, other geometries, and these are all sort of it's kind of a little archive from inspiration that I get from different dance notations. And some of them can be more figurative. Here also there are some music notations as well, into the loop, because this one is more about the geometry, or like thinking through geometric shapes for composition more in general, and some of them are more dance, other more music related. And I just find it interesting how you sort of put those thoughts into the structure of languages. Yeah. And like what you prioritize. And I think also for all of those today that we're talking about making their own language, like you come to this point where you need to make decisions, and you're definitely prioritizing some things over others. And like all this thought process I find quite interesting. And even though the dance we know, or that we mostly encounter, is very physical, and I think that's great, and I definitely engage with that side a lot. But then I start thinking, what can we learn from these that happens in the dance world, and how does that provide different ways of looking into the digital world? And in my case, and I know that there's a lot of extended reality environments now that sort of try to blur the boundaries between these technologies. In my case, I'm actually quite simply looking at websites, really like just the most simple website you can think of, and really trying to stretch how that environment can become, or how can we think about them quite differently. So if you're interested in these in these notations, I'm happy to share a bit more of my research when we are chatting later. Right, so from that kind of, also one more thing is that the notion of choreography comes from writing dance composition, but it also thinks about ways of making that movement public. And I think this really connects with the notion of interface and the information you put somewhere out there, which is meant to sort of connect with other people. So there is an audience to your website, and there's a lot more performativity in these environments than we sort of imagine. So so I thought I would then do some demos as well, or very like simple scripts. So just as a disclaimer, I'm not a trained programmer, but yeah, JavaScript is definitely the language that I most enjoy working with, and also the one that makes more sense for me, given that I make websites using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And for that, just gonna go to a website that you might be aware of. I'm not being sponsored, huh? But yeah, so here I'm actually going to open the developer tools. And I'm very curious about the way I make my own website and websites for commissions and clients, but I'm also interested to understand how other websites out there are made. And when I was learning how all of this works, I was quite intrigued by the fact that the very basic nature of, or the basic structure of a website is divided with head and body, which sounds like very anatomical parts to me. Very human-like, very physical. And I don't know, this is a bit of a philosophical side. I'm not going to go very deep into that, but for those who have heard of Descartes and have heard of the Cartesian divide, it sounds like a quite interesting way to sort of think about how the body works. That there's a head where oftentimes scripts go. I know it's not only necessarily there, but like you have the head, then you have the body, the skeleton, and one thing sort of commands the other. Right, so this is coming from the dance scene. This is definitely a bit problematic for me, and also coming from understandings of cognition as embodied, as like fully bodied. It's things that, are not really chopped and divided like that. Nonetheless, I just thought I would stay with the trouble, right? Like, I don't think I can convince a whole consortium to change these names yet. But, we've come quite far at rethinking the names of these structures. But yeah, I decided to just stay with the trouble. So what I do instead is that I write my own functions, and I just, the names that I give to them are, they come from choreography. They come from ideas that I have around what it means to inhabit these spaces. So I'm going to start with getting rid of the logo, and yeah. Making it a bit bigger and making it a bit pinker. This is just a little, I'm going to call it like manifesto. And yeah, this is just one, I guess it's with the vocabularies that I stick with, and that I try to think how to look at these web pages otherwise. So I'm going to have a few more demonstrations. So I don't know if anyone here knows what a pirouette is. It comes from French. It essentially means rotating, and it's quite actually it's a quite hard thing to do more than 2 turns. So if you're ever in a ballet and you see someone doing that non-stop, it's insane. So respect for that. So those are some of the things that I start thinking about. Is like, what if Google would have decided to do things very differently? But also like understanding the logic around, every time I come to a place like this search engine, I actually discover how much it has changed, how much the namings of all these parts change, which it's quite impressive how. Also how meaningless some of the namings of these things are. And yeah, this is definitely the platform that I spend most time with, but I'll show you in a second how actually I've taken over a few other environments as well. So this is, thinking, if you were to sort of put a box around everything and see how they look growing and shrinking, etc., it gives you a very different perspective of the space. And also the logic, how hierarchical it is, how linear as well. I'm also interested in the glitches that happen. Now, actually, I'm going to do another one. Another thing that I like thinking about is what it does to our bodies. How does it affect the way we see information the way we do? And I like playing with rhythms. And I guess decontextualization as well. So what happens if you sort of lose control of these tools and you can only see something that is being choreographed? And in fact, we are being choreographed. What shows in this search engine is very far from our control. And I guess I like thinking about those matters. must. And I oftentimes go a bit more abstract into the limits of understanding or not what's finding patterns, graphic patterns, and also stretching the limits of understanding what we can find in these platforms. All right, thank you, Google. Now, now I want to quickly go through a few other projects and wrap up. So, like I said, I've been learning a lot by using the web console. Oh yeah, the internet is slow, isn't it? So maybe we might not be able to see everything. So for example, checking out a platform like YouTube or other streaming platforms and try to understand the logic behind it. And yes, things that oftentimes are not visible in the naked eye. And also understanding when you try to select one thing, why other parts that feel like they look the same, they're styled the same way, but that they don't obey to the same classes. And then you start to understand, oh, that's because that's an ad, and it's not that obvious as I thought. And you just learn a lot of things from web dev tools and expecting these environments. I also get a lot of threatening messages, a lot of warnings, just like we heard before, like I don't think I'm doing anything illegal by using the web dev tools, but a few social media tools do want you to believe that if you do something, you're going to break the whole of the web. Yeah. Unfortunately not. So this is just a lot of screenshots that I took from different experiments and different ways to sort of choreograph these environments. And the code itself, I also consider it as a choreography that can be reproduced, actually. A lot of these things are online, and I make them available. This one is, I just wanted to also give an example of what Dylan was mentioned, that I do these live coding performances, a bit like this demo, but way more dramatic. And I'm going to actually perform tomorrow one around tango. And I just wanted to show how that looks like if the page loads. So in this case I'm using Google Translate and I'm playing with the scripts in real time and also finding the glitches, having the machine sort of speak out loud and finding the glitches when it sort of gets stuck, and exploring a little bit those errors. And there's also a moment where there's dance. I'm dancing with the machine. You should try, it's good. And the last one I wanted to show is was a collaboration with Double Dagger, and I called it choreographic analytics. And it's like you basically can perform a search, and you can choose whichever word you want, and it will basically scrape the whole archive and give you snippets of. It will give you snippets of text that has that code in it. So you sort of have a different way to look at the content in this website, which is a lot of essays from different artists, and it sort of gives you snippets and the perspective of how different people see, for example, the word code. You can also see what other people, actually I'm glad that there's nothing offensive happening. I didn't check before. It's safe. But yeah, you can see what other people have searched, and it also, in a way, like it's also choreography, a tale in some way, because you sort of see where other people have gone and what they're interested in. So this is just one, I mean, I'm trying to be practical. None of this is very practical, but it's one example of thinking choreographically in relation to an archive, for example. All right, so yeah, there's a few more projects on my website of websites that are much more simple and less, they dance a little bit less, or future plans. I'm gonna keep on dancing. I'm doing a PhD, and it's called, guess what? Human-computer counter choreographies. I actually got accepted to with this proposal. And it's for the development of methodologies and tools that comprise embodied techniques from choreography and algorithmic performance to improve web-based interfaces. But actually, the PhD will be about focusing on transparency and legibility. So I'm really curious how we could use these metaphors, these other ways of viewing the web to really help with understanding what's happening in the backstage of the websites that we use. There's a lot of analytics, there's a lot of scripts that are rendered, like we've seen by using the web console. And I'm just curious, how can we make these spaces more transparent, more legible, and used by users as well, not just programmers, nothing against you. But it's just a missed opportunity, I feel. So yeah, well, thank you all. And I'll pass on the mic.